Hi, I'm Dr. Andrea Stover, licensed marriage and family therapist, and you're listening to the Modern Day Romantic Podcast. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode. I'm very excited to announce that I've started a new segment on the podcast called Conscious Couples Corner. So this is our first episode, and every so often I plan to spotlight a real couple, two true romantics that are doing this dance called a relationship. It's my intention because there's so much talk out there about relationships, theory, advice, insights into various things. But I think nothing can be more transformative oftentimes than hearing other people's experiences and learning from them. So for this episode, we're going to be talking to Amy Jean Carter and Joshua Benavides. I'm very excited to talk to them because when we were going over, even how to introduce them on the podcast, their authenticity shone through. And they said, look, it doesn't really matter who we are in the professional world. We just want to be able to be ourselves, our real selves, and really help people see, the beauty and the power of love. So simply, they say, Amy and Joshua are spiritual partners, passionate lovers, and the best of friends. Can you get any sweeter than that? All right, without further ado, here's Joshua and Amy. All right, well, welcome Joshua and Amy. I'm so excited to be here with the two of you. Let's just kind of start out with talking about your inner romantics. I'm very curious to hear, what a romantic means to you, how kind of being a romantic lives in and through you and your relationship with one another.
Okay. Well, in my own experience, I think I feel like I've had, especially growing up in a Latino family. Yeah, my family's from Chile, which has a lot of idealized romance. It's everywhere. Lots of fantasies around finding your other one. So when I was just 4 years old, I remember that I used to have this very clear longing. Even then, I didn't even know what it was for, but I would have these emotional experiences of longing for love in some way. And as I grew up and had many experiences with relationships, I started to slowly see how there was a definite distortion that I was living with, the fantasy of what I was hoping for, which was, I think we all have a lot of that. It's these conditioned ideas, kind of Disneyland type of fairy tales around love and someone completing you and all of those kind of fantasies. I call them fantasies now, but as a romantic, of course, that was the hope, that was the dream. Only to find out that that's really just not how it works at all. I still can see that love and admiration for the romantic. I feel like the poetry and the music, love and all those things, they make up such a rich aspect of culture, and simultaneously though, I can also honor and see that when it's translated into actual human to human relationship, there's a lot of other stuff going on that romance can only it gets you only so far.
I think that's similar to me where I just, I think the in love part is what I've always been racing after and wanting to continue with, is just those first few months of being in love with somebody. And then, the relationship evolves and conflicts come up and things that we didn't know about the other person, or we're finding out more about ourselves. And then that's when the work starts coming in. And previously I would leave relationships because the in love aspect wasn't there anymore. It was gone. So I was like, oh, I'm not in love with this person anymore. But what we've been studying and finding really is it's about standing in love, and it's a different kind of love than just what floats around in the beginning. So,
Yes.
Yeah, after all the
yes.
chemistry wears off,
Yeah.
you know, or it doesn't
Mhm.
totally wear off, but you know, it changes. That's for sure.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think this is the real crux. I'm so glad we're even starting here. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about, and just bring in, what is it like then when, okay, we're in this relationship, and Amy, as you said too, okay, first couple months, and that kind of wears off, and now what? So can you two talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that process? So what led to being able to realize or stretch into a beyond that initial, butterflies and the feel goods, and what's that been like, and where does that stand today then between the two of you?
For me, I think our kind of butterfly stage lasted quite a while, I felt like. And we started talking about moving in together and all these things. And then we start. So Joshua has a daughter. I have a son from different partnerships. And it started coming up that, we parented very differently. And so that started kind of changing our minds about, well, we have two little kids to also integrate into this piece. Are we really ready to move in together? Our parenting styles actually are quite different. How is that going to work? And I think that's when we started to start looking at more realities within the relationship. But then there was also a piece when we got into a big fight over some things that parts of myself that I hadn't really confronted within this relationship. And, he had a very different viewpoint about how things should be than I did. But it was a big enough fight that we decided we needed to really start doing some deeper work. And that's when we started looking into the Gottman Institute and different tools to use, and just really starting to look at how to communicate, because my communication hasn't always been the best, only because I get when I get triggered, I kind of just lose myself and get dysregulated, and then can get in these big fights. And so that was a big turmoil and issue. And that's really, I think, what started us more into this growth process of how can we connect and how can we grow together and still love each other and stay in this relationship for the long run,
Anything you would add?
Well, I'll start with this. So when Amy and I came together, I was in a very different space and understanding around love than, so what I was sharing earlier was kind of like throughout my adolescence and all of that. But by the time I came together with Amy, I was looking for a spiritual partner. Yeah. I was looking for someone that could walk through the fires with me. And by that, I mean supporting each other in our growth and development, to be able to hold the space for our shadows, all the elements and darker aspects of ourselves that aren't resolved or aren't fully understood or even fully aware of, and utilize relationship as like a vehicle for expanded awareness. Yeah. Greater love is another way to speak about it. And so when we came together, there was all the chemistry as well and all of that. But yeah, like I my orientation was a little different. Like, to me, I knew the chemistry was going to wear off. I knew that this was going to happen. Like, this was very clear to me. And so I was an advocate for, we're going to need to start actually engaging the work here, and to work this together, to work on the communication, to work on conflict resolution, to not be conflict avoidant, to actually like engage it. But that's where a big part, like Amy pointed out, came out, was that how we engage conflict was very different. Yeah. And so we in the name of being together, in the name of making this work, we had to come into this, like kind of like acknowledge that, one, we're very different. You know, we literally are in some ways are very opposite, and not make that like a grounds actually for, oh, this is incompatibility, right? In fact, it was the Gottmans who said, or no, it was no, it was, I think the Hendrixes. They say something like incompatibility is actually the grounds for marriage. Yeah. Something like that. Yeah. And so actually us like embracing the fact that, you know what, some of these things we may never see them exactly the same. Yeah. And it goes beyond a little bit of this idea of like, we'll just agree to disagree. It's more like we'll agree to find a harmonious way to work with these two views and these two ways of being, and also take ownership of where I may need to grow, you know, where I need to acknowledge, like, you know what, actually, stepping outside of my, well, that's just the way I am kind of view, and into more of like, okay, how can I work this better? You know, how can it be better? I think that our relationship, we often do tell people, because we've been together for 2 years, a little over 2 years. Mm-hmm. But it feels like it's been like 6 or 7 years. Yeah. And that may initially sound like a bad thing. At least sometimes people react in that way when we share that. But it's only because of how much growth, really, you know, how much growth has occurred in such a short amount of time. And I think the biggest thing has been our willingness to engage that, you know, to engage the growth. There's a lot of tools that we had to bring that we didn't actually fully have or understood to be able to come to a place where I feel like we've reached a much more harmonious flow, you know, but it's been a lot of work. Like, it's no joke. Like, you know, I'm going to just share that I work with people in these depths for a living. Yeah, I've done that for like 20 years. And so I'm really clear that it doesn't matter how long you've been out there in the world. So for anyone here that's listening, that's a coach or a therapist or anything like that, or a spiritual teacher, it just doesn't matter. Because the moment you step into relationship, like, this sacred vehicle is one of a kind, one of its own. It's going to bring up all of the stuff that you have not been willing to see or couldn't see even, you know, with anyone else.
We are direct mirrors for each other in relationship. I mean, in any relationship, but especially in an intimate relationship. I mean, you are reflected all the time. So do the work or the relationship won't work.
That's what became very clear for us too. It's like, if we don't do that, this isn't going to work.
Gosh, there's so much, like, I'm just like, yes, in everything you're saying. One of the things you said, Joshua, you brought in the word shadow. And I study a lot of Jungian psychology and very familiar with that, and try to do that work with my own clients too. But I really think in order to even come into relationship with shadow, you have to be in a certain place within yourself. And that's what you were saying, you know, when you met Amy as well. Like, there was something, you were looking for a spiritual partner, and you were maybe even looking to confront or embrace the shadow or the unknown parts of yourself. And Amy, same as you, like, when you're talking about getting triggered, it's like, okay, what is this in me? And that alone, there's such a maturity there. It takes self-development to grow into that, and not think that, I love what you said too about, you know, the Hendrix saying compatibility is the requirement, or excuse me, incompatibility is the requirement for marriage. Like, you're good to go then, because, you know, it's really, and this is that difficult spot, I think, for romantics at certain parts, wherever they're at on the path, where it's like, no, I just want that harmony. I want that peace. I want that symbiosis, and to be able to just read each other and, I don't know, be fanned and carried around and eating grapes and just, you know, living in the Garden of Eden, that type of a thing. But really, what you're talking about, like this level of maturity and selfhood that needs to be intact in order to do this. This is so gratifying in its own way, but you have to be able to break out of that fantasy, that utopian fantasy that,
Totally.
we are each other's half in this like codependent, and we're just going to become whole through being together. And it's just going to be this smooth, easy. That's anything. It's anything but that, real relationship, real relating.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. I mean, what he wanted, originally was not what I wanted. I wanted to just have a good time and be in love. That's kind of like all I ever thought I wanted, in relationship. But then, coming with this guy who's so deep, it really made me start doing my depth work, because I love him so much that, the thought of not being with him was harder for me to embrace than just doing the work and allowing myself to surrender to that and change so that we could be together in a harmonious and loving relationship, So it's definitely changed a lot over time. And I'm so grateful because, I mean, the work is worth it. It's not the work is going to be forever in a way, but it gets easier for those of you out there who don't want to do the work, which was me, before, it's worth it if you can start connecting on these deeper levels and understanding each other and seeing, that both sides have a point and to really understand your partner and their depth too, not just your own. And that was something else we brought up earlier too, was instead of it just being about the I, it's about the we.
That's a big one. That's a really big one, because even our fantasies have a lot to do with just me, myself, and I. Really, that's where they're at. Me, myself, and I. To actually enter into a relationship is to enter into this different space where it's us and we, which is this integration oftentimes of polarities. It's integrating very, very different views, but finding that, this is one of the things I think that impacted us too. It took us a while to really digest it. I think it's for the ego, it's maybe a forever kind of, maybe it'll never be digested on the level of the ego, because the me, myself, and I, and what I want, and my fantasies around love, and my so on and so forth. We can go down a whole list of that. It's interesting that the more fixated we are on ourselves, and holding on to these kind of fantasies and what I want and what I need, and so on and so forth, when it comes to relationship, that's the exact thing that keeps us from actually experiencing and attaining the very things that we're looking for. So what's interesting is that two people actually have to set some of that aside enough to shift the orientation. Now I'm looking out for the other. I'm looking out for her. How can I support her? How can I love her the way she feels loved? And vice versa. And interestingly enough, as we go through that threshold, because I think it is a threshold, there's a threshold of fear. It's almost terrifying, especially with most people, middle age and on, have had plenty of experiences of being hurt in relationship, of experiencing heartache, of experiencing all sorts of pain related to relationships. So we have so many defenses that keep us in this space of me, myself, and I. And so to set that aside can be very terrifying. It can be very vulnerable, because it's, some say love is a risk. It's a tremendous risk, because you're risking being hurt again. Yeah. But at the same time, you can't reach those realms of deep connection, of communion, of actual relating, of actually feeling fulfilled, unless you do that, unless you're willing to step into that space and set aside some of that me, myself, and I.
And it's a commitment of turning toward each other instead of
continually. That was a big one too.
Yeah. Instead of, if you think you're right, or, you don't agree with the other person, or it's an argument or whatever. And then you're turning away from each other. It's like always coming back and saying, okay, let's understand the other person's point of view. Let's, and I think going back to the shadow work, and the ego, I mean, I think they go hand in hand. It's surrendering parts of yourself that actually bring a destructive way into the relationship. You have to surrender and let go of pieces of who you've been over time to then grow into this much more beautiful way of being and living in harmony with your partner. And it's worth it. It's so worth it.
Mm-hmm. As I hear you two talk too, I think this is the very thing that leads to what I want to say, like a larger, it's a transcendence of sorts. It's transcending the little I, the ego self, in order to be a part of something larger. And I think that's something I talk a lot about on the podcast, is that seeking of transcendence, but we're doing so like through doing the hard work to get there. This isn't like a spiritual bypass thing and just like, or like the shadow side of that, of like just fusing and merging with one another. Like this is actually, getting in there and having that friction, and through the conflict and through the encounter, and just really being able to have that mirroring and that reflection in order to consciously surrender certain aspects or qualities or components to be a part of something larger.
Yeah.
I think a big piece in that too was we had to like repattern, what is the word, reframe quite a few things as well, like conflict, like conflict and quote unquote fighting, I think that we really had to experience, like once we started to experience, like utilizing, again, bringing in different tools. Some of the tools that had to do with communication tools, very, very foundational, very simple, like very basic almost, but bringing those tools in so we can kind of get out of we can come back to like a platform, a ground, that's neutral, that we know that by utilizing this, we know something will come out of this, usually positive. Once we started to experience more how conflict can lead to greater connection, once we started to see how conflict actually leads us to deeper understanding of each other.
That's true. And
all of that, it started to really shift how we even orient around conflict, where, where conflict means something bad is happening, maybe at a very, fundamental level. For a lot of folks, conflict is bad, fighting is bad. You have these ideas around that.
I still feel that way.
And at the same time, though, every time when something comes up and we go through it and we utilize the tools, we have this reflection of like, wow, there's a closer, element now. We understand something that we didn't understand before. It's kind of like the conflict's only there because usually there's something you're not really understanding about each other. You don't really see something there, So it's like, it has to happen like, in some way, I think that's another fantasy that gets popped along the way. It's like, you're looking for a relationship with no conflict.
Doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Like, good luck with that. Man.
Yeah, a real relationship.
Not even in yourself.
Yeah, right. Oh, so true. So true. Yeah, it is. You say that word reframe, and it is. It's like, what if we did reframe conflict as being something to, in some strange way, like look forward to, like, oh, we get to grow from this, or we get to, maybe that's stretching it too far, but I still think there is something there around, okay, like, hey, this is an opportunity. Are we going to take this? Are we going to go with this? Like,
exactly.
let's see what can come from this. And within that too, I guess if I brought in an attachment lens, we'd be talking about secure attachment
Mhm.
there. Like, in spite of
Totally.
having conflict and maybe some level of distress with our nervous system, we have enough, inner foundation as well as security in the relationship to trust and believe and know we can and we will make our way through this, and I think
That's true.
sometimes when
Totally.
the conflict arises, people think, oh my gosh, like this will be the end, that it's that insecurity that sets in. And
Mhm.
what if we
Yeah.
can't resolve this? What if we're too incompatible or something like that? And, people have different ways of responding to that then, like just shutting down, sweeping under the rug, finding other distractions and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think there's really
Totally.
something here with that reframe that you're saying with conflict and the gift of conflict. Yeah, I have worked sometimes with couples that are so conflict avoidant, and when there is something that arises, like they really do think it's the end. When like maybe even they haven't had a single
Mhm.
fight, in years, and then they have one, and it's just there's just no. What do we do with this? How do we? This has to
Yeah.
be the end because our little, again, peaceful coexistence doesn't feel to be here. So I really think conflict has a lot to teach us, and it's the growing pains, that friction that leads to growth.
Yeah.
We had to do that a lot. We had to face that
Yes.
a lot. Like, it took some work to even come to a place of like seeing conflict as potentially a door to a greater possibility.
Yeah.
Because it did
Yep.
feel like that. Like the way you're describing it is kind of how it's. Yeah, that's kind of how it would arise in our experience.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you two have mentioned some tools. So I've heard the Gottmans and the Hendricks. So Imago work and the Gottman Method. And I also know that you know a fair bit about the Enneagram too. So I'm guessing that's a tool that just kind of.
yeah, that's a big tool too, for
Okay.
sure. I think that was kind of a game changer in a way, like getting insight into these kind of underlying undercurrents of your own personality, but also of your partner's personality. I think that, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. It has been a window into a greater compassion, a compassion towards both, Amy, and understanding some of these kind of like underlying patterns, and me, and understanding and why, like it actually, working with the Enneagram has clarified a lot as to why certain conflicts even happened, right? Whereas before it was kind of like, why are we in conflict again? Like what is this actually? And whereas it began to clarify the ground of, yeah, like why those conflicts came up in the first place, which, interestingly enough, yeah, I think that's also a part of conflict resolution, is understanding, just understanding.
Yes.
And I think that greater self-understanding, understanding your own patterns, catching yourself in your own, playing out your mechanical stuff, your defense mechanisms, all of those kind of things, seeing how you're doing it, especially in the moment, can lead to truly like working with the actual issue, because that's the thing, like make the problem the problem. Oftentimes we don't do that very well. We attribute the source of our problem as our partner oftentimes, or we attribute the source of our problem as something that happened or something that one did or something like that. But the source of that filter is in your own mind. And that's oftentimes where it's a little difficult to see. And so I really appreciate the Enneagram in that sense, because it gives you kind of this very objective bird eye view of your filters, why you do what you do. So,
but I also think it's a willingness a relationship's not going to work unless both people are doing the work. And so the commitment has to be there first, and there are a lot of different tools that can be used. I definitely think the Enneagram is great for doing your own work in particular, though, and realizing who you are, why you do what you do, also in relationship, and that helps you to take it to a different level outside of yourself as well. But it's important for us to all do our own work too. And you've talked about that before, Andrea, in like knowing ourselves well in and out of a relationship, but, doing our own work, taking time to ourselves so we can know ourselves better, know what it is we want, know what our boundaries are, know how we communicate. It's like, I can't emphasize that enough. We both take our own space and time. We're just very honest. Like, I need this day to myself, or, we're very communicative about our own needs and our needs as parents and all these things. So again, it comes back to communication, but all of the inner work and together work it's just essential for making a relationship run smoothly.
So true. So true.
Yeah, that prerequisite to be able to clearly communicate is to know yourself, to be able to know what it is that and yes, you can work some of that out in relationship, back and forth and self-discovery through conversation and connection with someone. But also a lot of the breakdown in communication oftentimes is, I don't know. Like you ask, it's not like I'm withholding. I don't know. I don't know the answer for me. So I love that you two are saying you give the self within each of you time and space, and you honor the self just as much as you honor, your relationship with one another. And I think that's
exactly.
Yeah. I think what I also hear is you're not trying to fit your relationship into a box. Like it doesn't have to look like this, that. Like there's freedom within the relationship. And that's another thing I think when people, whether it be through fantasy material or kind of what's put forth through social media or just media in general, movies, TV shows, various things, we can have these preconceived ideas of what a relationship should look like or needs to look like. And you two sound to really have a relationship that is authentic, and you get to define it, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah. I mean, it really, ultimately, it takes a life of its own. It takes on a life of its own. The relationship, the we-ness of it. If it just reflects you and just what you want and I don't know. I'd question that.
Well, that, and also, society has its own idea of what a relationship should be, or culture, or family. And we have really had to step up and define, we don't have to be living together. We don't have to be married and be raising the kids together. We're living separately currently, and this is our choice. And, like Joshua's mom asked the other night, so are you two moving forward, something? And it's like, we're not in any rush, like we're committed and we're moving forward at our own pace, and it's great. We have to remember to also block out what other people want or expect from us, and just continue to create our own values, our own life, our own relationship. So, and that's beautiful too in itself.
For sure.
I love that.
May I mention something more about specifically the Enneagram and how it has supported for myself? Yeah, just me, because I feel like it has been a game changer to. One of the things in working with the Enneagram, because the Enneagram, if anyone listening to this hasn't gone into or even knows what the Enneagram is, it's basically it's a spiritual psychology at its roots. Yeah, I think more modern day versions of the Enneagram have turned it more into just a personality typing kind of thing, but it actually runs very, very deep, and it's profound. What the Enneagram shows as far as Well, as I forget who, and it might have been the teacher Russ Hudson, or someone said something like, whereas most typing systems like Myers-Briggs and all these other typing systems, try to show you when people are searching for who you are. The Enneagram shows you who you think you are. And essentially, instead of saying, look, this is putting you in a box, it shows you the box that you've been living in and how to get out of that box. Yeah. And so to come into this kind of mirror, right, that I feel the Enneagram offers for me, and to see, and I have I feel like I see all the types within my own psyche, but I think a very dominant type 4 type, which is the romantic and all of that, but has a lot of each one of our personality structures has a lot of very twisted ways, of how we defend ourselves from pain, how we try to get what we want. I mean, we all have our sets of manipulations without even knowing it oftentimes, and all of that. It was very helpful and continues to be very helpful for me to have become aware of certain patterns that I wasn't able to really see, with, years of inner work, to just see it plain, someone, in the Enneagram pointing it out, and then finally seeing it in myself. And in relationship, how that plays out, because type 4s have all sorts of stuff around, what could affect relationships, from ambivalence to seeing what's wrong with their partner, to seeing what's missing, to feeling constantly not good enough, to all sorts of stuff that exists on that level. So to, again, make the actual problem, to like become aware of what's actually impacting my experience in relationship, and seeing that it's not my partner. Like that's huge. I think that's a really big shift, to see my partner is not the source of my pain right now. The source of my pain is happening in here, and that is where the work needs to happen. Yeah. So
yes.
Yeah, and majority of people are not looking at themselves as their issues, which is generally
it's a big pill to swallow for the ego. Like, I'm not the problem, you're the problem.
Exactly. Everything else is the problem except for me. So in general, that's the biggest work we can do in this life.
Mm-hmm. So Amy, for you, what type are you on the Enneagram, and how does that show up kind of through the mirroring of this relationship?
Well, I'm a 7. And I definitely have bits of the 6 and 8 that infiltrate in. I haven't gone as deep with it into how it affects our relationship, aside from me always planning something. I'm a big planner. So I've definitely taken steps back from that, and I can see how it can cause some anxiety, like the planning, and in our relationship too. Like if I am always tacking on something else and like, okay, we have to do this because, this is the plan. And I've actually been able to relax into flowing more with Joshua. And that's been really great. Actually, I've found like less anxiety about, okay, we have to do these things, and just allowing things to flow more. And we end up enjoying ourselves more when we're able to just go with the flow. So
presence.
Presence, being present. Absolutely. So I would say that's one of the bigger things that it's made me aware of.
Yeah.
Which is huge.
Perfect.
Yeah. Huge.
All right. So as we kind of start to wind down this episode and our time together, I just wanted to ask this final question, which is, if you could go back in time and say something or give advice to yourself at the beginning of this relationship, what, if anything, would you say to that version of yourself?
You go first.
For me, it would be to not speak or say things without really really doing the work around what the issue is first, because there's some things that were said in the beginning of our relationship that were very hurtful, and it's really hard to backtrack in a relationship when you've said hurtful things, or, resentment can come from that, or hanging on to something that's been said in the past, which isn't relevant in the future. So, I would say to myself, just really be sure what wants to be said before you say it in relationship.
Yeah.
I've learned that now. Yeah. And I've certainly got a whole lot better with that. And it's important because you don't want, this is like the love of your life, you need to also treat them as that always, even if you're upset about something. So.
What about you, Joshua?
My initial response to that question when I thought about it was, I would go back and tell that version of myself, all right, buddy, you might want to wait. You might want to wait because this is going to be a little rough. Or you can proceed, but put on your seatbelt because it's going to be a little rough.
It's going to be a rough ride.
It's going to be a rough ride.
And it has been. Yeah. In a lot of ways, it's been bumpy. In the beginning, it became pretty bumpy there for a while. So,
yeah, I often tell Amy that I'm really proud of us because of how much we've been able to transmute, to completely come into a different relationship with. And again, a big part of that is like understanding, because again, even on the level of the Enneagram, if there were any types that there's certain types that are very polar opposites, and 7s and 4s are pretty darn opposite to each other on so many levels. It goes deep. And so again, it's like coming back to the incompatibility being the ground for a marriage. It's not about seeing it the same way, doing it the same way. It's not about the same way. If there's anything, there's underlying agreements, there's underlying understandings of how we're going to work with and through these things. But what starts to also occur is this appreciation of these differences. This appreciation of wow, okay, I can see how that actually adds a certain richness to my life and experience that if someone else was just like me, that would not be present. And I actually really love that. I really love that about my partner. And so that's kind of so anyway, I would tell myself to just embrace the ride.
No, I think that's really great to hear, though, because again, earlier in the episode, we were talking about the beginning of the relationship, and we do have this fantasy or fairy tale of even how the beginning's supposed to go. And so when it doesn't go that way, or if it's bumpy, or I think romantics can be so ill prepared for that, because it's just you meet someone, there's this fantastic connection and all of this hope, let's say, and just a felt sense of we've got something here, and you're not always prepared for the journey that you're about to embark upon. So I think that's great. Yeah. And Amy, what you said too, just that in the moment versus, I'm going to say the rest of your life, in the moment you might feel like you want to say something, but if this is the love of your life, or if this is someone you're wanting to have in your life for an extended period of time, maybe there's going to be ripples into, my words and what I say. And that's really hard when the emotion is so strong, and that's our experience in that moment. So I can really honor and respect what you said there too.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And Joshua, he's always, along the way been saying words matter. They do matter. And they do. We're all human. We all have feelings, and we have to remember that. even when it gets tough.
Yep.
And with that, if I may, I want to add to that in all of this, one of the big things that we have come to really recognize is so important is this, the piece of self-regulation and co-regulation, because it's like when things come up and we lose that sense of groundedness, like that's when things can escalate. That's when things can go in so many directions that afterwards you're sorry, because it's like your whole ego fixation stuff comes up and takes over, and it's to be self-regulated and to support each other in self-regulating your nervous system, to breathe, to do, like sometimes even in the middle of a conflict,
20 minutes.
Yeah, like you stepping away, like there's so many different regulating techniques. But also, what we found too, it took me a while to truly understand this, and I'm sharing it because I think it might be helpful for some, where even in the midst of conflict, because for whatever reason, I had this idea that once you resolve conflict, right, then you hug, you love each other, so on and so forth, right? It's like something that happens after. But what I began to learn is that actually, even in the midst of maybe things aren't quite resolved yet, but a hug, even when things are like really like charged up, it's not always appropriate. So timing is very important.
Asking.
Okay? I always ask. I always ask her, can I give you a hug?
Yes.
And even when she's like in clearly a dysregulated kind of state, that hug, that co-regulating goes so far into supporting her nervous system to calm down, to feel nurtured, to feel grounded. We can hold that space for each other, and I think in a relationship, that's so important.
It is
to be able to do that. Like, one of the things that we
lean into each other again, that's part of it. But to just be offered that in those moments is kind of like I can still love this person even though I'm angry with them.
Totally. So, I think this comes to also, if I may add one more piece here. I feel like I talk a lot, but whatever.
Okay.
Because we've been talking about this, since you invited us to join you here. And one of the things that came up in our conversation was, the Greek philosophers had very interesting, very insightful views on love. They categorized love, different kinds of love, And the ones that really stood out to me when I was reflecting on that, and also our conversation about this, is because I think one of the things that we had to look at early on too, and I think everyone has to in some way come to terms and get a certain understanding of, like, how do you define love? What is love for you? This is so foundational and oftentimes not explored at all. We come in with, again, these assumptions and fantasies, and we've never really clarified what is love, for you, what is really love? I really appreciate the Greeks' view. And what I feel like in reflecting on it is like a sweet spot for intimate, loving relationship. And that is the view of agape love, which is the love that is like unconditional. It's like divine love. It has a divine quality. It's unconditional. It's a space that is like more like a substance. It holds everything, and everything's loved. But then there's eros, which is that passionate, fiery, love as well. That's sexual, sensual love. And in relationship, it occurs to me that there's a sweet spot that has to kind of happen, because if it's all just sexual, sensual, chemical, love, when those hard times come, and they will come, you're going to be in some trouble, right? Because suddenly you can't hold a space of love for your partner, and they can't hold a space of love for you when you're going through those hard times. It's easy to love when you're feeling, excited and turned on and stimulated and all those kind of things, right? Love. What we can call eros love. Yeah. But to be able to love someone through those difficult emotions, through those difficult, challenging experiences that we're going through, when our system's dysregulated, when we're can't say the right thing, no matter how much we try, or anything like that. And to still like hold a space where, you know, you're loved. You're still loved. It's okay. You can go through this and I'll still love you. Yeah?
Standing in love.
Standing in love, as you put it, you know, like that's the agape love. And we need the agape love for those hard times. And the eros love, you know, for all the good times. For sure. So, you know, I just wanted to throw that out there because I think that's such a huge piece too. Like we grow in our capacity to love the things that don't quite match what maybe deep inside we feel is unlovable, you know, but we grow into being able to like hold a space to love that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I've studied the various Greek definitions or forms of love as well. And I knew you were going to go there with agape. Yes. And there's so many others that they mentioned too, which I guess maybe we could get together and talk about that at a different time, because it'd be really interesting to dive into all of those, because I do think, we kind of try to pigeonhole, you know, what is love? And it is kind of this eros, what is that kind of erotic, sensate, passion, romance, all, and it is so wonderful to have that. And that's not going to be the way it is all day, every day. And so what is it if that's not? Yeah. So, and really, you know, just my little philosopher's mind goes to, okay, so what is required to even open to the possibility of agape, you know, to stand in that, you know, because that's the whole journey to opening, to being, to doing, to getting, to receiving. So, yeah,
like that's the big piece that, you know, Amy has I think we've touched on it throughout the whole conversation is the self, you know, it's self-love. Like there's, it's like loving those aspects of yourself that, you know, we were talking about the shadow. Another way to talk about the shadow is the rejected self, right? It's those aspects of you that, again, feel unlovable. They feel like that's not who you even should be, you know? It doesn't match who you have learned you think you need to be in order to, what you name the game, you know, be loved, be approved of, be, you know, whatever the game is. And so to like go there and look at that in yourself, which I think Amy and I have engaged quite a bit, is being able to look at those aspects of our being that have clearly been in a deficient state of love, not receiving any love at all. To be able to come into an acceptance, being able to come into an understanding of why that's even there, and so on and so forth. And like it sounds cliche on some level that we've all heard on some place that to love someone else truly, you need to be able to love yourself. But I think that's true. That's just it's very true in my experience.
And we've learned how to love ourselves even more since we've been together. I mean, on deep levels that we didn't before, because we've been open to this work, you know, loving and accepting ourselves for who we are.
It just makes me think about how sometimes people think it's a choice. I either, you know, put you first or put me first, or, you know, I have to choose between myself and you. And that's not what you two are describing. You know, there's a way for it to be a both and then some, which I think is lovely.
It has to be. It has to be that way for everybody to not only get their needs met, but for being content, for being happy. You can't just be putting yourself out here for another person. Cause then you're losing.
Self-abandonment.
Self-abandonment. That doesn't work either.
Doesn't work.
Well, any final thoughts or reflections you'd like to leave our listeners?
Personally, I can't speak highly enough. If for me, it's the conflict resolution and the tools that we learned from the Gottman Institute have been so essential that I think, I don't know if we would have lasted had it not been for us actually integrating and using those tools. And, we veered away from them for a while, and then
it was noticeable.
It was noticeable. We were in conflict and we couldn't resolve it. And so we started having to remind each other, okay, let's use the tools. Let's get back to using the tools. And every time we use the tools, it's such a faster, we're able to resolve the conflict so much more quickly with growth and understanding and being able to move forward in a better way than we were able to before. So I can't speak highly enough for using those tools in your relationship.
And by the way, the tools, these aren't like really complex tools. It's literally like the Hendricks also talk about this as well. They all seem to agree that there is a way of communicating that may sound really basic and so on and so forth, but when you implement it, especially when two systems are dysregulated, especially, to come back to that as like a grounding rod, it's profound. And the three main steps that we use are one is mirroring each other. That it's interesting that, so I'll speak for myself as just a coach, for however long. Like it's there's so much mirroring that happens in coaching, but interestingly enough, and that's why I said from the beginning, like, it doesn't matter if you're a coach, doesn't matter if when you're in your own relationship, intimate relationship, and suddenly your triggers are going off and so on and so forth, like, man, you lose sight of everything you do and learn and all of those things. So these tools are so impactful in that sense, because they become a grounding rod for you. So we mirror each other.
We say what the other person says, and to make sure that we are or I would mirror what he said in order to make sure that I'm understanding exactly what he is saying.
Which sounds so basic, but it is incredible how much we hear that the other person's not actually saying.
Yeah.
Like, that interpretive piece.
We say one thing. That interpretive piece, and that interpretive piece can be the conflict itself. Like, that could be the reason the conflict came up.
Dysregulated and fired up, and so the mirroring, so that you can actually understand both sides of the story. And then the understanding the other person's, taking the time to actually understand what they're saying. That's
the validation piece. So that would be the step 2 in this process, right? Or 3, I guess.
2, because 3, the last one, which is the most important, is empathizing.
You feel.
Saying, I understand how you feel, and it's not even, you don't have to say you're sorry even. It's just saying, I can see why you feel that way. I can see how you feel that way. Because then you feel heard, and you're not just being pushed off and the other person's right. Yeah. You're actually being heard. And
like, I can see how that can feel hurtful. Yeah. I can see how that might make anyone upset. Actually, if I saw it in that way, that would make me upset too. So it's like, it validates each other's experiences. And then,
and then leaning toward each other, coming back together, and then, it bringing us closer because we can understand where the other person's coming from. So,
which can involve forgiveness. It can involve, all sorts of other things. But those little 3 steps: mirror, you validate, you empathize. Like, what a game changer!
Yeah,
truly.
Yeah. Well, sure. I thank you so much for bringing yourselves, your relationship, just wonderful people, beautiful souls. And I've really enjoyed this time with the 2 of you. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, so have we. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share. And again, hopefully it's helpful to
everybody,
some of the listeners and all of that. And,
I think you've really taken those beginning, like the romantic and the fantasy, and you've shown us what that looks like, through lived experience and through self-development and all the riches that are available, the gifts, the transcendence. But it's not through the bypassing, it's through that hard work and through the grounding of the human and the spiritual, kind of bringing those into partnership. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
We like to say
it's been beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say one of the things that early on when we were looking at, the levels in which was important to harmonize and come together. It was the divine, the human, but also the animal. The animal, the human, and the divine. These three components, like it brings the fire, it brings the water, it brings everything. And it's a beautiful thing. So, there you go.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been beautiful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you're interested in learning about ways to work with me, head over to my website, themoderndayromantic.com. From there, you'll be able to contact me and learn a bit more about the customized intensives and retreats I offer both individuals and couples. You'll also be able to support future podcast production via Patreon. There are several membership levels to choose from, including the Beating Hearts Club, which gives you access to exclusive content every month. Thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you next episode.